Hello, I'm Marie Horton. I am the Interim Portfolio Director for Education, Skills and Employment on the island of St Helena, the beautiful island of St Helena. And I am going to talk today about the work that I've been leading, which is a review of education on the island. We have been blessed with lots of stakeholders who have been very interested in education and have given a lot of time and support in sharing their views and their findings. We've met lots of different people at lots of different times, and we've had some very detailed and structured meetings. We've had one consistent message from everybody that we have met, and that message is that education standards on St Helena need to improve. My job has been to look into that statement, to look at the evidence and to see if those views are substantiated. And indeed they are. There is a need to change and improve education on the island to improve our children and young people's life chances. What I'm going to do now is to go through our pupil outcomes and explain what our data analysis has shown and what it means. The first data we're going to look at are our early years outcomes, and these are for our Nursery 1, Nursery 2 children. The outcomes that we measure are early learning goals, and they are a measure of a child's readiness to move to their next phase of education. You'll be looking at some graphs, and the grey graph is our whole cohort. We have small numbers of children in our schools in St Helena, and that causes challenges in terms of data analysis because a few children make a big difference to our percentages. If we have a look, we have early years outcomes for 2 years, and we can see in grey the size of our cohort. We can also see in the green graph, the green boxes, boys' outcomes, and in the reddy pink graph we can see girls' outcomes. And what we can see is that in terms of a measure of school readiness, that 32% of our children in both school years were ready for in 2024, 32% of pupils met the early learning goals and they were ready for the next phase of education. That compares against 67% in the UK, and for those children in the UK, their education outcomes are still being impacted by COVID. If we move on to our next graph, which is our primary school phonics outcomes, this is a very important piece of outcome data. It measures children's ability to say sounds and decode letters and sounds. Those skills really help children become fluent readers. Whatever subject you're studying, whatever key stage a child is in, they need to be a fluent and confident reader. And what we're aiming to do is to secure age-related expectations in phonics. Our graph, again, on the right-hand side, shows that we've got more females securing age-related phonics standards and fewer boys that are securing age-related phonics standards. In 2024, 20% of our pupils secured the phonics standards against a UK average in 2023 of 80%. And this is a cause of concern for us, and because we felt that we needed to address this as an urgent priority, we have already had some phonics training in January of this year, and we have more phonics training scheduled for March. If we move to our next graph, what we're looking at is the potential of our pupils. So what are their capabilities? And we can see that in the grey graph, and their actual outcomes. And what we can see is that in all three areas, in spelling and grammar, reading and maths, our children in Year 6 last year had greater potential than their actual achievements. Now, these Year 6 tests were pilot tests in St Helena, but they do show that we have got some way to go before our children meet their potential, and that we do have a potential to improve a lot. If we move to the next graph, we can see outcome data against gender, and we can see that girls particularly are outperforming boys in reading, and that both in our spelling and grammar and maths, we have got plenty of potential to improve our outcomes. In 2023, 61% of children in the UK secured the age-related expectation in all 3 areas of SATs. In 2024, that was 13% in St Helena. Now, it was a pilot year, and we are hoping for better outcomes this year. So I think what I've shown is that we have got the opportunity to really improve outcomes for our primary and early years children. If we move to our next graph, we look at our GCSE attainment. And the line that I particularly like to draw your attention to is the green line, which shows our GCSE outcomes, which are 5 GCSEs, including English and Maths. And what we see is a significant downward trend. And we see a downward trend from 2021 going down. And in last year, in the summer, in 2024, 20% of our students in our secondary school achieved the standard of 5 A to C's in English and Maths. And they are a benchmark standard, an international standard, that a child is achieving a level of education which will enable them to move to their next phase of education. Given that all the island's leaders come from our population, our politicians, our business leaders, our government leaders, our voluntary sector leaders, this outcome cannot be something that we are content with. If I move to our next graph, I discussed how we have very small cohorts of children, and that changes in outcomes of a few children can make a big difference to our percentages. To try and flatten that data risk, we have analysed the English and Maths outcomes for all children on the island between the school years of 4, 5 and 6. And our next graph looks at primary potential in English and Maths. So we have put as much data as we can together to get as valid data as possible. And what we can see in our graphs, again, we have the grey graphs showing the potential of our children. We can again see that we've got both males and females not reaching their potential in English or Maths, and we can see that boys are significantly achieving less than girls, and this is a real cause of concern and is likely to impact their secondary outcomes. Which leads me to say a very difficult sentence, and one that I don't particularly enjoy saying, is that education is the engine of change. We want education to be the positive engine of change in St Helena, but currently education is the engine of decline, and that must be something that we are all concerned about and need to address. My final graph is looking at skills level by age. And what we can see in this graph is we cannot see that skills levels across different generations are increasing at a fast enough rate to meet economic needs. So we have a long lag, and possibly this is really supported by the fact so many people have left St Helena, of us not having the kind of broad, skilled, well-educated workforce that will bring in inward investment and a dynamic economy. And again, that is another key reason why we need to change education. I'm now going to talk about the Education Review. The Education Review that I'm leading has very clear terms of reference. And the two big objectives is to explore how St Helena Education Services can be future-proofed to support the economic and human capital development on the island. So that is, how can education support the island's economic objectives, and how can education support each individual achieve the very best they can, both in terms of personal growth and in terms of qualifications, because that combination of personal skills and academic qualifications, the application of knowledge and the application of skills, determines their human capital. And the second key objective is to explore how we can enhance educational attainment and learning outcomes for all children. So that's both our children who have got vulnerabilities like SEND and SEMH. We want children to be able to have real confidence about the many exciting opportunities there are on the island, and that families and carers and the community know what standard of education they can expect our young people and our children to receive. The Education Review has got a number of components. All of these pieces of work are complete, and they're all in a process of going through a governance process and early implementation. So the Education Review is based on evidence. We have a very detailed data set which enables us to know what our outcomes are, where our strengths are, and where our challenges are. That is supported by a 5-year detailed costed education standards bid, which has been submitted to Her Majesty's Government as part of the financial aid mission in early 2025. We have a final Education Review report which will be available to the general public very shortly. And finally, we have been focusing on our primary schools. We have a recommendation for a primary reorganisation, and that is supported by a capital bid to EDIP to enhance the facilities in our primary schools so they can start to meet a standards framework. And I'll talk more about education standards and standard framework later in this presentation. So if we move on, we've talked about we have got a number of outcome challenges and opportunities to do better. One of the things that was a surprise as part of our look at data was attendance. And school attendance in St Helena is a serious cause of concern. The graphs that we're looking at look at our attendance data over the last 5 years. The blue graph, the blue bar graph, is where children attend school 94% of the time, and that is a goal of any school, to have children in school learning and being part of a school community. In the academic year 23-24, less than 40% of our primary children had good school attendance. If we move to our secondary school, again, we can see that secondary school attendance has declined sharply over 5 years, and that in 23 to 24, attendance was improving, but less than 30% of pupils had good school attendance. Why is this something that we're so concerned about? Well, my first question is, if a child isn't in school, is where are they? Why aren't they in school, and is that child safe? And then my next question is, if you're not in school as a child, you can't learn. So we need the whole island to support our schools getting children to school every day. As a portfolio, attendance is now a key improvement priority. We have updated our attendance policy for all schools. All schools have the same attendance policy and the same processes. We are working to develop a joint communication strategy to actually explain to everybody on the island why children coming to school is so important. We report our attendance data each half term to the Portfolio Advisory Board, and school attendance is now one of the portfolio's key performance indicators. And my request to you as a member of our community is please support our schools. Please support our children to come to school every day. It's quite normal for children to not feel like going to school or to feel a bit under the weather, but we need your active support to bring our children into school every day. And thank you. I'm now going to move on to our primary school reorganisation. I talked about how all the work we're doing has a very strong evidence base. Working with the FCDO, so we had some civil servants come and work with us, we undertook a very detailed options appraisal with masses of stakeholder engagement. We spent lots of evenings and lots of days talking to people and capturing their views. Using that information and lots of other data, together we have secured an options appraisal with a very strong evidence base that support a set of options for the primary reorganisation. Reorganising schools is complex and difficult, and at times it's really challenging. All of us get very attached to our local schools, and children get very attached very often to their teachers. And because of this, education change is hard and it can be very challenging. But my message to you is that maintaining the status quo, what we currently do in our primary schools in St Helena, will make it extremely challenging, if not impossible, for our education standards and outcomes to improve. There is a compelling need for change, but I do not underestimate how difficult and challenging and at times upsetting that change may be. I'm now going to move on to talk about education standards. Because I've talked about our outcomes, I'm going to discuss now some of the factors that underpin the challenges that we have with outcomes. One of our challenges is staffing. Before I talk about the challenges that we have with staffing, I'd like to pay a really deep and heartfelt tribute to my local school staff. Their commitment to their children and to their schools is exemplary. There are many reasons why we have challenges with our outcomes, and I will go through those. But again, I would like to personally pay tribute to our local staff. We have significant staffing shortfalls and qualification gaps. Our schools are understaffed and we really struggle to get enough people to work in our schools to make sure that we have a full complement of staff. We have in St Helena a unique standard of teacher qualification. So in St Helena, a local qualified teacher is qualified to a level 4. Internationally, a qualified teacher will be qualified to at least a degree level, very often to a master's degree level, and will have a postgraduate qualification. But we have many locally qualified teachers who do not have level 4 qualifications. We have struggled to get enough locally qualified teachers on the island to work in our schools. And because of that, we had last year 33 weeks where children were taught by somebody who did not meet the benchmark of a locally qualified teacher. So 36% of our primary classes are currently being taught by classroom instructors and teaching assistants. So you can see that qualifications is a challenge and that staffing shortfalls are also a key reason why we have some of the outcomes that we have. We struggle to attract people to work in our schools because of our low wages and a lack of training. We have had some support this year, so we've been working closely with Hampshire Local Authority, who came and visited in November, and they undertook some work including a review of our SEND and SEMH provision. They reviewed the teaching and learning in our primary schools. Our head teacher in our secondary school is an internationally qualified school inspector, and he has undertaken a review of standards of teaching and learning in the secondary school. Following that visit, we have got some detailed benchmarking in terms of where we are, in terms of the skills and knowledge of our staff. And we had our first training focused on what that data is showing, where we had 3 days of focus training from Hampshire Local Authority, focusing on phonics, early years, inclusion, and teaching and learning. We will be having 2 trainers from Hampshire Local Authority arrive in late March, and they are coming to support our schools in phonics and English. And my request from you is, as stakeholders, please support education and children and young people as a long-term island priority. If we want to address some of the challenges that we have, and by doing that, we will be supporting the island's economy, we are going to need long-term support. Education needs to become a critical priority for the island. Without that support, without that long-term investment, without that long-term prioritisation, then children and young people will struggle to fulfil their potential. The island's economy will struggle to thrive, and with the attainment gap between girls and boys, we are going to see challenges in terms of our social fabric. I don't have any pleasure saying those things, but that is what our data is very clearly showing. A thriving island needs a very strong education system which enables every child and every young person to be their best, and our school staff to learn and thrive. If I now move on to the quality of teaching, learning and assessment, we know that we have got a journey of improvement to take. But again, I'd like to pay tribute to the commitment and dedication of my school staff. They have had a long-term deficit of training. There is a lack of qualified staff. They've been hugely isolated, and there has been a lack of accountability and oversight without an education standards framework. And if you're thinking, what is an education standards framework? Then fundamentally it's the equivalent of Ofsted. So an education standards framework sets out very clearly what a school needs to do to meet a set standard. St Helena has never had an education standards framework, and that has meant that the portfolio and school leaders have done a lot of doing their best. And our schools and our education system needs long-term sustained investment and support. And again, I'll just reinforce how essential it is, how essential that long-term investment and support is going to be to enable St Helena to meet its economic objectives and for the island to thrive. So I've talked a lot about challenges, but we have a really exciting education improvement blueprint, which you should be able to see. And we have had a political decision in September 2024 to adopt a standards framework. And this is a massively exciting and welcome development. We are going to be working to secure the COBIS accreditation and compliance standards, and this gives us a very clear roadmap of what it is we're trying to achieve in schools and benchmarks for success. When we reach these standards, we should see our outcomes improve, and we will see our daily practice develop and become much stronger. And securing those standards will need to be supported by updated education ordinance. So how are we going to reach COBIS standards? There is a lot of change and exciting developments that will need to be made. Our local staff need improved salaries so that coming to work in our local schools becomes attractive to the local community. We have put together a 5-year costed plan to the UK Financial Aid Mission that covers all 9 COBIS standards. We are seeking an annual external review so we can identify what we're doing well and where we need to focus our improvement efforts. And this is very standard stuff in schools. We have a bid in terms of capital investment in our primary schools, and we will need to do a very similar bid for our secondary school. We've been working really hard on our staffing, and we have recently had approval from the BIOT Fund, which is the British Indian Overseas Territories Fund, which will help us strengthen our staffing. If we move on to the slide that looks at the COBIS standards, you can see that there are 10 standards and 9 of them apply to St Helena. So over 5 years, our schools and our school leaders and our portfolio leaders will be working to secure together across all the schools our safeguarding and safer recruitment practice, our student welfare work, the facilities, so our facilities in our schools meet COBIS standards. Governance, we're going to be establishing school governors, and if anybody is watching this and would like to become a school governor, please do get in touch. We'll be having a very clear and strong set of ethos and values. We'll be working at developing our learning and teaching. We'll be strengthening and supporting leadership in schools. We will have clear, effective communication, including a fit-for-purpose website, and we will have a strong extracurricular enrichment and engagement offer. Those words were very easy to say. It is going to take a lot of work and investment to meet those standards. It is going to take a good 5 years of relentless improvement and relentless support. The changes and improvements will be sequential, and they will build up over time. They will need to be sustained and developed. And we are going to need additional recurrent funding, but we're also going to need a lot of active support and engagement from the whole community, and that includes politicians, the whole government, businesses, the voluntary sector, parents, guardians and everybody else. This needs to be an island-wide priority. So my request to anybody watching is please support our improvement journey. We won't get everything right, but we will do our best and we will focus relentlessly on improving the education provision for our children. I'm now going to talk about resources. I talked about how we are going to need additional resources in our recurrent fund. From an external perspective, St Helena schools are not badly funded. And when I arrived, I kept being told by everybody I met in the school system, we don't have very much money. And I was slightly perplexed by this until I did a deep dive into where our funding is spent. If we look at our first pie chart, our budget for primary schools, you can see that we spend approximately 58% of our budget on staffing. That is a very low figure. The kind of figure that I'm used to looking at is about 80%. So a school that would be spending 85% on staffing would be spending too much. I think we would generally consider, and 75% possibly not enough. And why are we spending so little on staffing? It's because we've got some very large costs elsewhere. 25%, so 25 pence in the pound in our primary school budget is spent on broadband, and 5% in the pound is spent on IT recharges. However, we have a number of budgets that we really struggle to manage, and they would be buses, bus costs, they would be petrol costs for the buses, they will be an IT and electricity. I think I've got the four of them right there. And we struggle to keep those expenditure within the funds allocated in our budget. They very often overrun, and the place we take that overspend is from our staffing budget, because that is our big budget. And so therefore it means that we do have real challenges. In terms of our very high IT expenditure, it is a large amount of money. Our bus costs are also quite significant, and they are roughly about £800 per child per annum. If we then move on to our secondary school, you can see that we spend less funding on staffing. We spend 54.4%. Again, we spend significant sums on IT recharges and broadband. And again, we have high costs for our bus fares. With the budgets that we struggle to keep in line with the funding allocated, we do find that our schools are very short of money, and the place that has been traditionally raided to make sure that we have a balanced budget is our training standards budget and our staffing budget. All of that leads us to where do we go next? We have requested additional funding from Her Majesty's Government, and we, in terms of our COBIS implementation plan, can evidence that for us to move to COBIS standards, we need an initial investment in year one of 2.85 million, and moving on we need an additional recurrent investment of 2.3 to 2.4 million per annum, which is a very significant sum of money, but also showcases the kind of our scale of need. Moving on, I've talked a lot about schools, is we do have other priority areas which we will be aiming to pick up later through the implementation of the education review. We want to do some work in terms of early years. We need to do some development work, intensive work in terms of SEND and SEMH provision. Our initial teacher training is an area that we are very aware that we want to strengthen and develop, and we want to secure a long-term partnership. And then that leads us finally to the area of skills. We do have a rich post-16 offer, and we want to strengthen that when we've looked at our other areas. In terms of funding, we may not get any additional funding. If we don't get any additional funding, we will still be working to secure COBIS standards, and there are definitely areas of improvement that we can make. But we will retain some long-term challenges with our schools potentially being understaffed and insufficient training of our local staff being available. We will struggle to meet the needs of many of our pupils, and I think boys' outcomes could remain a significant concern. If we get additional funding, then what we will see is we will see a gradual improvement. School improvement is a steady process. It is not what I'd call very quick, and it is not speedy. We will see a gradual improvement in school leadership, in pupil attendance, in our safeguarding practices, in staffing stability, in our staff getting better training, applying the training and being able to improve their qualifications. We'll see improvement in the quality of teachers. We'll see improvement over time in the outcomes of our pupils. But that is going to take time because we have got children in our school system who have got some notable gaps in their learning. We will see SEND pupils' needs being met more effectively, and we will see more children meeting their potential. We want to see our children's aspirations increasing, and we need to do a lot of work improving our careers provision. We should see school governors being established and having an effective role in our schools. We want to see a relentless focus on literacy and oracy. So the verbal word, how people speak, how they listen, is so important to their learning. We want to see children being enthusiastic readers and a line of children on a Saturday morning at our library. And we will be working to secure COBIS standards. So in summary, our schools are facing significant financial constraints that impact the staffing, the curriculum development and the quality of education due to limited funding, a lack of consistent training and low local wages. But we can do better, and we're really hopeful that we can and we will. We have got some really detailed data which helps us make informed leadership decisions. We are very aware that our standards must improve. We do need higher recurrent funding, and we've evidenced why. We need to improve pay for our staff, training, leadership and our use of data. We have some key posts missing in terms of a qualified careers lead, an attendance officer and a data post, and there is an opportunity to restructure our schools. And my request of all of you is please visit and support your schools. I know that a great many of you already do. You support their assemblies and their community events. And please make children and young people central to community decisions and priorities. We have got a number of concerns which I've summarised on this slide, and the two that I'm really going to draw to your attention to is one, our children have got loads of untapped potential. They are very able to be the leaders that we need them to be. They are able to make a positive impact on their own lives and the island. And to enable that to happen and to overcome the disparity that we have between boys and girls, education, children and young people need to be a relentless island long-term priority. In terms of next steps, we will be shortly having a decision about primary school reorganisation. We've got some key posts to recruit, including a programme manager to support the work that we're doing, a substantive portfolio director and some other key leadership posts. We'll carry on working in close partnership with Hampshire Local Authority to support our staff in training. And we have got a roadmap for change, including a governance structure. And we will be working to update our education ordinance. And finally, I ask you to consider the needs of children and young people. The island's children need to be living somewhere. They need to be living on an island that actually actively values children as a strategic priority in all government work, in EXCO papers and all government policies. The island needs to make sure that children's basic education needs are met in adequate provision. We need to be able to say that children are receiving high quality education every day. If we want children to be fluent readers, we want them to be confident readers, they need to live in a literate rich environment. Signs, posters, displays, the use of words. That is a real opportunity for the whole island to make St Helena a literate, rich environment. We need play for children to be encouraged. Children need play at different kinds of play at different ages. But the importance of play is critical. So we need safe, secure areas across the island for children to play, and we need to be able to make sure those play facilities are age appropriate. Children need to be supported and encouraged to talk. They need to be actively listened to, and they need to read and then read and then read again. Children need work experience, and they'll need more than one work experience, and we're going to be working with government and the private sector and the voluntary sector to develop that. They won't get everything right, no one does, but we all get better over time. And children need exposure to the world of work from a very early age. When you've got your fireman's hat on, when you've got your stethoscope round your neck and you're playing, you are that person. That is where the exposure to the world of work starts. And my final message is that together we can change the future for our children and our young people. Together, by working together, by making their needs a long-term, active and visible strategic priority. Thank you very much for listening.